The first devourer came through the stone ring at dawn, and Mara knew it by the silence before she heard anything at all. She was on the eastern parapet when it happened, 19 years old, 30 days a widow, and still wearing her husband's knife on her left hip because she hadn't yet found the will to move it. The morning was cold enough to show breath. The crows that nested in the ring's upper buttresses had gone quiet all at once, a cut-off silence so complete it felt surgical, and Mara had been a soldier long enough to know that birds didn't quiet for weather. She turned from the wall. Below her, in the gray pre-dawn of the Eastmark settlement, smoke was rising from a direction it shouldn't have been. The scouts reached her before the alarm bells did. 2 riders, both of them gray-faced and riding too hard for anything good. The younger one, a boy named Cale who had only just earned his green braids, pulled up so short his horse nearly sat. He tried to speak and couldn't. The older scout, a woman named Priya with a scar running ear to jaw, spoke instead. "Devourers inside the ring, Commander, at least 9 confirmed. No breach found, no hole in the wall." Mara stood very still for one breath. Around her, the parapet guards were already moving, reaching for weapons, some of them looking to her with that particular expression she had learned to recognize over the past month. The expression that said they were waiting for the queen to do the thing that made her the queen. She thought of Darrow for exactly 1 second. His voice, the way it dropped when he was pretending to be calm, the weight of their infant daughter in her arms 3 months ago before the fever. Then she closed that door and put her shoulder against it. "Get the civilians to the inner wards," she said. "Every rider we have goes out as messenger. The Thornwall garrison needs to know yesterday." She looked at Cale, the boy who hadn't been able to speak. He was steadier now, she could see it, steadier just because someone had made a decision. "You, stay with me." She took the stairs off the parapet 3 at a time. The trouble with devourers was that you couldn't negotiate with them. You couldn't reason with them, couldn't threaten them, couldn't promise them things or show them a flag of parley. They moved through the world the way fire moved through dry grass, not with malice exactly, but with a totality that made malice seem almost gentler. At least malice had reasons. Devourers had only appetite. They were tall. That was always the first thing people said who hadn't seen one before, "They're so tall." Mara had stopped thinking about the height years ago. She thought about the hands now, the specific way the fingers curled, the things some of them did with their mouths. She had learned to read them the way a hunter reads wind. It had kept her alive when Darrow had been alive beside her, and it would keep her alive now. She found the first confirmed sighting 3 streets into the Eastmark. A devourer had come through the outer market. How? She still didn't know. There was no breach in the ring. The scouts swore it and was feeding near the grain stores. Around it, the market was a wreckage of overturned stalls and scattered grain and things she stopped looking at. 2 people were running. Several were not. The devourer was smaller than average, perhaps 12 feet at the shoulder, with the loose-jointed gait of the young ones and the milky, unfocused eyes that told her it was running on instinct rather than direction. Undirected devourers were dangerous the way a falling boulder was dangerous, massively, stupidly, without plan. The directed ones were the kind that killed you thinking. Mara had 6 soldiers with her. She had her husband's knife, a short recurve bow she'd taken off a wall hook as she passed, and 8 arrows in a quiver she'd grabbed from the same wall. She did a fast inventory of what was not enough and what would have to be enough anyway, which was a kind of arithmetic she had been doing since she was 16. "Spread out," she said. "I want it looking at 3 directions at once. Cale, you're with me." The boy nodded. He had his spear. His hands were shaking slightly and he wasn't bothering to hide it, which she appreciated. Soldiers who pretended not to be afraid were the ones who did stupid things. They came around the grain store from the south. The devourer was still feeding, crouched over something Mara looked away from, and for a moment she had a clear shot at the back of its neck. That was where you killed them if you could manage it, the base of the skull, where the spinal cord met the brainstem, a spot about the size of a man's fist, assuming the man's fist was somewhat larger than average, and you could get to it through meat and bone and hide that was harder than tanned leather. Her 8 arrows would not be enough if she missed. She did not miss. The devourer dropped. Around her, the soldiers exhaled in something between relief and disbelief. One shot, through the neck, at 60 feet, and the queen hadn't even seemed to breathe hard. What they didn't know was that she'd been holding her breath since she stepped onto the parapet and seen the smoke. She had only 7 arrows left. "Find me more," she said, and kept moving. The reports came in through the rest of the morning like a tide. 9 devourers confirmed inside the ring, no, 12 no, they were still counting. Somehow there was no breach. The walls were intact, every gate accounted for. The scouts had run the entire circumference of the Eastmark ring and found nothing. No gap, no hole, no sign of how 12 titans of appetite and hunger had gotten through 3 feet of layered stone and iron. Mara listened to the reports in the garrison yard, directing traffic between sentences, and felt the wrongness of it sit at the base of her skull like a splinter. "Priya," she caught the older scout's arm as she passed. "The devourer I dropped in the market. Go back to it and tell me if it looks like the others." Priya frowned. "In what way?" "Any way it doesn't." She didn't have time to explain the feeling. She barely had words for the feeling. It was the same instinct that had kept her alive when good tactics hadn't been enough, the same reflex that had made her grab her husband's knife before she knew she needed it. Something about this incursion was wrong in a way that went past the logistics of it. She didn't get answers until midday. By then she had 3 confirmed kills, 2 dead soldiers, and a headache building behind her left eye like a slow fire. Priya came back ashen. "The young one you dropped," she said. "There's something odd about it." "Tell me." "It's the body. Where you'd expect to see the usual anatomy, it looks more like a person. Underneath." Priya started again. "There was a man in Ragako village who went missing 3 months ago. He had a scar on his left forearm, a burn distinctive. The devourer has it." The silence that followed was absolute. Mara sat down on the edge of a water trough. She put her hands on her knees and breathed very slowly and thought about what it meant that the devourers might not be what everyone had always believed them to be. Not creatures from beyond the ring, not mindless beasts from the outer dark. People somehow, somewhere somehow, people had become devourers, or devourers had always been people, or she didn't have enough information and she needed it badly. "Where is Minister Aldrich?" she said. Priya's expression went careful. "He's been asking for you, actually." "I know, where is he?" "The keep's inner chamber. He said he knew something about the walls." Mara stood. She put her hand on her husband's knife, which had become a habit she hadn't consciously formed, and walked toward the keep. Minister Aldrich knew exactly what the walls were made of. He knew because he had always known, because his order had always known, and because the knowledge had been kept from every soldier and every queen and every ordinary person inside the ring for 200 years on the grounds that knowing would cause panic. He explained this to Mara in the calm, slightly defensive tone of a man who had rehearsed justifications so many times they had started to sound like logic. She listened to the entire explanation before she spoke. "The walls," she said, "are made of devourers. Dormant ones, hardened, they have been encased in a sense for. The walls are made of the things that are killing my people." "It is more complex then." She held up one hand and he stopped. She looked at the wall of the inner chamber, which was also the wall of the keep, which was also technically part of the great ring wall, and she thought about what it meant to have lived her entire life in a structure built from something monstrous. She thought about whether this changed anything about the immediate tactical problem, which was that 12 devourers were somewhere in her city. It didn't, but it changed other things. "You're going to tell me everything you know," she said, "and then you're going to help us use that information to keep people alive, because I don't have time for secrets today and I won't have patience for them tomorrow. Is that understood?" Aldrich looked at her for a long moment. He had the expression of a man reassessing a situation he thought he had controlled. "Yes," he said, "Commander." She noted that he said commander, not girl, not child, not the dozen small verbal diminishments men his age had been using on her since she took the title. She noted it and filed it under things that did not make him trustworthy, only cautious. She sat down and listened. The garrison hall was packed that night. Word of the incursion had spread the way word always spread in close-walled settlements. Faster than anyone wanted, slightly more distorted at each telling, arriving at most ears in a form that was technically true and emotionally catastrophic. Mara had found over the past month that the best way to handle this was to stand in the middle of it, in plain sight, and be the thing that was less frightening than the alternatives. She stood on the map table. Around her, soldiers and civilians and a handful of outer ring scouts packed the hall shoulder to shoulder, and she let them look at her for a moment before she spoke. "We have a breach with no visible entry point," she said. "That means either the devourers came through the walls themselves or something brought them through. Either possibility is solvable. Every problem is solvable. Some of them just cost more than we want to pay." She paused. "Here's what we know and what we're doing about it." She gave them the information in plain language, without softening. She told them about the grain stores, the kill count, the scouts' perimeter run. She told them about Ragako village's missing people and what Priya had found, keeping it clinical, keeping her voice steady, watching people's faces as it landed. Some of them went still in a particular way, the ones who had people missing from their own households. She did not tell them about the walls. Not yet. Aldrich had given her enough information to know that releasing that specific piece of knowledge without a plan to manage it would turn grief into chaos, and chaos killed more people than devourers did. When she finished, there was a moment of silence that felt like the whole hall drawing breath together. Then General Rudo spoke from the back. "What about the resonance?" The temperature in the room changed. Resonance were the directed devourers, the ones with intelligence behind the eyes, the ones who moved in tactical patterns, who seemed to understand things like formation and flanking and supply lines. Every major incursion in the last 50 years had eventually revealed a resonant at the back of it, directing the mindless ones like a shepherd moved sheep. "We have no confirmed resonant presence," Mara said. "We have no confirmed resonant **absence**, Rudo said. She looked at him across the hall. Rudo was 10 years her senior, broad through the shoulders, had survived 4 incursions before Mara had taken the title. He had been Darrow's general before he was hers, and he had always been careful around her in a way that felt less like respect and more like evaluation. "No," she said, "we don't, which is why every ranking officer is on a double check-in protocol until further notice." She kept her eyes on his, including generals. He held her gaze for exactly the right amount of time, and then looked away, and she had no way of knowing whether that was deference or performance. She stepped down from the map table and went to find something to eat, and tried not to think about how many people in that room she had trusted with her life. The second day was worse than the first. Not in terms of devourer numbers. The patrols had cleared 7 more by nightfall, and the total incursion count appeared to be capping at 16, not the 30 the worst rumors had been claiming. Worse in terms of what the extra devourers revealed about the first ones. The pattern of their emergence, when Mara charted it on the garrison map with pins and string, showed a spread that wasn't random. They had come up from specific points. Points that corresponded, with a precision that turned her stomach, to the locations of the settlement's 4 largest food and water stores. Devourers didn't plan, not on their own. The mindless ones moved by appetite and instinct, and while they were horrifying, they were not strategic. This pattern was strategic. This pattern meant a resonant had placed these 16 with the specific intention of isolating supply chains before a larger assault. She was still staring at the map when Rudo came to find her. He had General Bren with him, which was unusual. Bren and Rudo had never been friendly, ran rival factions in the garrison council, had barely spoken in years. Seeing them walk in together made a cold thing move through Mara's chest. "Commander," Rudo said. "General." They stood in the doorway. The lamplight from the corridor was behind them, which put their faces partly in shadow, and later Mara would think about that. About how she'd had 1 second before she could properly see their expressions, 1 second of not knowing, and how different that 1 second felt in retrospect from every second after. "There's something you need to know," Rudo said. His voice was different. Not wrong, exactly, not guilty, not nervous. Flat. The way a voice went flat when it had been carrying something heavy long enough that the weight had become ordinary. "Then tell me," she said. He told her. He and Bren were resonants. He said it almost plainly, almost without drama, the way you might say I've been promoted or I'm leaving the city. As if the weight of it had compressed beyond the point where emphasis was possible. They had been resonants before they were her generals, before they were Darrow's generals, before they had trained at the garrison. They had been sent into the ring to locate the source of a specific kind of power that the outer resonants believed resided somewhere within the walls. They had been looking for it for 8 years. They had not found it in Darrow. They now believed it resided in Mara. She listened to the entire thing standing at the map table with her hand flat on the surface. She didn't move. She was aware that she was doing the breath-holding thing again. The same thing she'd done on the parapet when she'd seen the smoke, and she made herself breathe because you couldn't make good decisions without oxygen. "You were with him when he died," she said. A small pause. "Yes." "Was it you?" "No." Rudo's voice shifted on that word. Something got into it, regret, she thought, or the memory of regret. "The fever was real. We don't kill. Not directly. That's not what we are." "What are you, then?" "We're here to bring you out," Bren said. She was matter-of-fact in a way that Rudo wasn't, less burdened by it, and that told Mara something about how long each of them had been carrying this particular stone. "There are people beyond the ring who want to know what you can do. There are people beyond the ring, Mara. Living people. More than you can imagine." Mara looked at the map. The pins. The string. 16 points of strategic incursion planned by beings she had trusted with every classified piece of garrison intelligence for 4 years. "I need a minute," she said. Neither of them moved. "I need a minute," she said again, and something in her voice was different this time. Something edged and very quiet, and this time they both took a step back. She turned to the window. Outside, the settlement was in its second night lockdown, fires banked, streets clear, the skeleton patrol doing circuits in the dark. Somewhere out there were 9 more of her soldiers she needed to bring home. Somewhere out there, according to Rudo and Bren, was a world beyond the ring that she had been told since childhood was nothing but devourer territory, uninhabitable void. She pressed her thumb into the edge of the table until she could feel the grain of the wood. "You're not taking me anywhere," she said. "But you're going to help me get my people through this incursion, or I will find a way to make that very difficult for you. And after this is done, you're going to tell me everything about what's out there, about what I can do, about all of it. Every word. Or I will spend whatever time I have left becoming the worst possible problem for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish." Another pause. "Agreed," Rudo said. "Good." She turned back to the map. "Now tell me where the resonant commander is directing all of this from, because I need to know before dawn." They told her. She half expected to find she couldn't believe them, that the information would feel tainted by its source. But information was information, and the tactical picture it created was sickeningly clear. The resonant commander, the one running this incursion, the intelligence behind the 16 planted devourers, had positioned itself atop the ring wall on the settlement's northern face. From there it could direct the mindless ones through some mechanism Mara didn't fully understand, a kind of resonance or signal, something that bypassed language entirely. It also had her people. 4 scouts captured in the first-day confusion, held somewhere in the outer ring structure. Alive, Rudo was fairly confident they were alive, because the commander wanted leverage, not bodies. She had until dawn to mount a rescue. The garrison, when she assembled it in the pre-dawn dark, was not in good shape. 2 days of rotating patrols and sustained action had thinned the reserves. Half her riders were exhausted. Several of her best fighters were carrying wounds from the previous day's clearing operations. She had Rudo and Bren, whose capabilities she now knew to be significantly larger than a pair of human generals, and whose loyalties she had to treat as provisional at best. She also had her soldiers' faces, looking at her in the lamplight, tired and frightened and waiting. Commander Aerith, who was 60 years old and had served under 3 queens before Mara, caught her eye from the left flank. She had a bandage around her right hand, and she was still holding her sword with the bandaged hand, which meant she had made her own calculation about what the hand could bear. She gave Mara a small nod, not encouragement exactly, something more stripped down than that. More like, I see what we're working with and I'm still here. Mara put her husband's knife on the table in front of her. She looked at it for a moment. Here's what we have, she said, and here's what we're going to do with it. She laid out the plan. It was not an elegant plan. It used bodies as bait and timing as a weapon, and relied on things going wrong in specific ways that could be managed rather than right in ways that couldn't be predicted. Aerith looked at her once, sharply, and Mara met the look and held it, and Aerith looked away and didn't say what she'd been about to say. We follow Commander Aerith's riders into the perimeter, Mara said. We pull the Devourers south. The northern face clears. We have maybe 10 minutes at the wall before the commander redirects. She paused. I'll go up the wall. The rest of you get the scouts and get out. Who goes with you? Aerith said. No one. Commander. No one, Mara said again. This part I go alone. The charge happened at first light. It was not a glorious charge. Glorious charges were the kind that historians wrote about afterward, because they had survived well enough to be remembered. This was the other kind, desperate and loud and full of wrong turns, people shouting names in the smoke, horses going sideways on wet cobblestones. Aerith led it on a gray mare with her bandaged right hand on the reins and her sword in the left, and the soldiers followed her because she went first, and that was often enough. The Devourers came south the way Mara had predicted. Not all of them, 3 of the directed ones held position, which told her the commander was smarter than she wanted it to be, but enough of the mindless ones turning toward the noise and the movement, enough to clear a path. She went up the wall on the north face alone. The ring iron rungs were wet with morning condensation and her hand slipped twice. Below her, the sounds of the battle were receding into something she had to stop listening to, because every human sound in it was a person she knew, and she could not afford to care about that right now. She focused on the rungs, on the placement of her feet, on her breathing. She was 40 feet up when she heard it, not a sound exactly, more like a pressure change, a shift in the quality of the air. She looked up. The commander was above her on the wall. She had seen resonance before, at distance, twice. Nothing prepared you for the size of them. This one was not monstrous in the way the mindless devourers were monstrous. It moved with deliberateness, even a kind of grace, and its face had something in it that was worse than blankness. Intelligence. It looked at her with something she could only call recognition, and she realized with a cold drop in her stomach that it knew her, that it had known who she was before she had arrived at the base of the wall. It reached for her. She let go of the rung and fell. Not far, she'd seen this in training once, a reflex move that nobody ever wanted to actually try. She caught the rung below her, swung, used the momentum to take herself sideways along the wall, and came up behind the protrusion of a buttress. The commander's hand struck stone where she'd been. The impact shook the wall enough that she felt it through her boots. She pressed herself against the buttress, breathed thought. There was a sound below her and to the right that she had not been expecting. A pause in the battle noise, a gap in the shouting, and then one voice cutting through, not calling tactics, saying a name. Her name. She looked down involuntarily and saw it. Among the devourers being drawn south by Aerith's charge, one had stopped. It was standing in the eastern lane below the wall, and it was looking up at her, and it was smiling. Not a resonant, the eyes were the wrong color for a resonant, the build was wrong, but its face had something in it that no mindless devourer ever had. It had Darrow's smile. Not Darrow's face. Not his height, not his coloring, not anything she would have called a resemblance. Just the smile, that specific curve, the one she had seen every day for 3 years, the one she had last seen 31 days ago before the fever had taken the last of him. It was there in the devourer's face like a message, or a taunt, or a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. She thought she was going to fall off the wall. She didn't. Her hands locked on the buttress stone with a grip that was not conscious, not willed, just biological, the body's refusal to fall even when the mind had gone somewhere else entirely. She gripped the stone and looked at the smiling devourer, and something happened inside her chest that she didn't have a word for, something that started as grief and passed through grief, and came out the other side as something harder and much, much colder. The world tilted. This was, she learned later, what it looked like from the outside. She opened her mouth and made a sound, not a word, not a scream, somewhere between the two. The sound went out across the wall and the lane and the settlement, and everything that was a devourer, every mindless one, every directed one, all 16 of them stopped. They all turned. Not toward the soldiers, not toward Aerith's retreating riders. Not toward the food stores or the water supplies or any of the strategic targets the commander had spent 2 days positioning them to take. Toward the commander. She didn't understand what she had done for 3 full days afterward. Rudo tried to explain it on the first day, and she told him to stop, because she needed to sleep first, and she needed to eat something, and she needed to stand at Aerith's shoulder, while the older woman got the captured scouts through their medical examinations, and she needed to be present for all of the things that needed her to be present, before she could afford to sit in a room with a former resident spy and learn what she was. On the 4th day she sat. "It's not a weapon," Rudo said, which was the first thing she needed to hear. "It's not control, it's not domination, it's older than that. The residents don't fully understand it themselves. Their commanders have been looking for it for a generation because they thought it was a power they could use." He paused. "It isn't." "Then what is it?" "It's recognition. Something in how you're built, the particular way you're put together at a level smaller than biology, lets devourers recognize what they were, not what they are, what they were before." He looked at his hands. He was doing that more often now, Mara had noticed, looking at his own hands as if he was still occasionally surprised to have them. "The smiling one, you recognize something in it." "Yes." "And it recognized something in you." That recognition, that moment of being seen, being known, it breaks the direction. The commander's signal is based on the mindless state, on the absence of the old self. Your recognition gives back the old self just for a moment, and in that moment the commander's voice goes silent. Mara sat with this for a while. "That's not a power," she said finally. "That's just grief." Rudo was quiet. "I looked at that thing and I saw my husband smile and everything I'd been holding closed for a month just," she stopped. "That's not strategic value. That's just a woman falling apart at an inopportune moment." "No," Rudo said. "That's a woman who didn't stop being human when things got bad enough that it would have been easier. That's the part they can't replicate, the part that makes the recognition real. You have to actually, he stopped, started again. You have to actually care about what they were, not what they are. The caring is the thing that works. She thought about that for a long time. Outside, the settlement was returning to something like normal, not the normal of before, which had included believing the walls were just walls, and the devourers were just creatures, and the world beyond the ring was uninhabitable wasteland. A different normal, one that knew more and was working out what to do with the knowing. She put her hand on her husband's knife. The people beyond the ring, she said, the ones you said were there. Living people. Yes. Are they in trouble? Rudo looked at her carefully. Most of them. Are there devourers between here and them? Yes. She nodded slowly. She thought about Aerith, who had ridden a charge with a bandaged sword hand. She thought about Kale, who had been shaking on the parapet and stayed anyway. She thought about Priya, who had gone back to a devourer corpse and told her the truth when the truth was terrifying. She thought about Darrow, about the way he had always said she was the one who would figure things out. She had always thought it was the kind of thing you said to the person you loved, a kindness, a faith that outran evidence. She understood now that he had been correct in a way neither of them had known how to name. Then we have a lot of work to do, she said. She stood up. She straightened her shoulders the way she did now, the way she had learned to do when there were people watching, not performance exactly, but a kind of deliberate arrangement of the self. This is who I am. This is what I offer. This is where I stand. She walked to the door, stopped. Rudo. Commander. Don't call me Commander when there's no one else in the room. We've established that you're not actually one of my generals. She paused. My name is Mara. You can use it. He was quiet for a moment. Mara, he said. She nodded once and walked out into the light. The preparation took 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, she learned things that remade the shape of the world she lived in, things that should have broken her and didn't, because grief had already done the most thorough demolition work, and what was left was something stripped down and honest and harder than it had been before. She learned that the ring walls were full of dormant devourers and always had been, that her ancestors had built their salvation out of the bodies of the transformed. She learned that beyond the wall there were other settlements, other people, other queens and generals and ordinary men and women who had been holding lines against the same tide. She learned that the resonant commanders were not simply intelligent devourers. They were something older, something that had chosen their nature at a point when choosing was still possible, and they had been directing the mindless ones for purposes that served a plan too large and too long for any single human generation to see clearly. She learned that her ability, the recognition, the caring, what Rudo had called it, was not unique to her. There had been others. There would be others after her, but it was rare, and it was the one thing the resonant hierarchy had not been able to account for or replicate, the one variable in their long plan that kept not behaving as predicted. Human stubbornness, human grief, human refusal to stop being human. She learned all of this, and she integrated it, and she began to plan. The day she led her first column out through the eastern gate, the first time in recorded history that a garrison force had gone through the gate in formation rather than fleeing through it, she stopped at the threshold. The world beyond was not what she had been told. There was grass. There was sky that went the same color of gray to pale blue as the sky inside. There were ruins of things in the middle distance that looked uncomfortably like buildings, which meant that people had been out here before and something had happened to them. There was wind. There were, in the visible distance, the shapes of things moving. Kale, at her left shoulder, was doing the same thing he'd been doing on the parapet that first morning, not hiding his fear, just standing in it. She had decided that she liked this about him. "You know what I'm thinking about," she said to him. "No, Commander. I'm thinking about how many problems I've looked at in the last month that seemed impossible until I was actually in the middle of solving them. She paused. Problems are usually about information. You think the thing in front of you is one kind of problem, and then you get close enough to see it properly, and you find out what kind it actually is, and then you can start. She looked at the moving shapes. Some of them were devourers, some of them might be people. The whole world out there is a problem I don't have enough information on yet, she said. Cale was quiet for a moment. So we go get the information, he said. Yes, she said, we do. She stepped through the gate. Behind her, in a column 400 soldiers wide, the garrison of the Eastmark Ring followed their queen out of everything they had ever known and into the world that had always been waiting for them, full of horror and people and grass, and the gray blue of an open sky that went further than any wall they had ever built. Mara walked at the front of it. Her husband's knife was on her left hip where it had always been. Her bow was across her back. The wind off the outer plain came at her face cold and unfamiliar, and she let it, because there was no point in flinching from weather. The first of the distant shapes resolved itself as she drew closer. Not a devourer, a scout from a settlement she'd never heard of, wearing the green of a foreign garrison, staring at her column with an expression she recognized immediately, the expression of someone who had long since stopped expecting rescue and was now recalibrating. She held up a hand. The column stopped. She walked forward alone and stopped 6 feet from the foreign scout and looked at him steadily until he stopped staring and started actually seeing her. My name is Mara, she said, Queen of the Eastmark. We've been inside our ring for about 200 years, so I'm going to need some information about what I've missed. She paused. Also, where are the nearest devourers, roughly how many, and do you have food to spare? The scout, a young man, maybe Cale's age, with the particular look of someone who had survived long enough to get tired of surviving, blinked once. Then slowly, he almost smiled. Yeah, he said, we've got food. She nodded. Behind her, 400 people who had followed her out of everything they knew exhaled, and the sound of it was human and enormous and absolutely undefeated, and the world, which had not yet finished being terrible, would have to decide what to do with that. It usually didn't know what to do with humans who refused to stop. That, she had learned, was the point. The world beyond the ring was not silent. That surprised her. She had expected emptiness, the blasted terrain the old records described, the stripped-bare outer wastes that made the devourers seem like the natural apex of a ruined ecology. What she found instead was a landscape that was trying very hard to grow back. Scrub grass in the cracks between paving stones that might once have been a road. Vine growth colonizing the foundation stones of structures whose upper halves had been taken down or had fallen. Birdsong, distant but real. The world had not been destroyed. It had been abandoned, and abandonment and destruction were different problems with different solutions. The foreign scout's name was Tom. He was 22 and had been outside the ring since he was 14, which meant he had spent 8 years developing the particular competencies of someone who had never had the luxury of walls. He moved differently than her soldiers did, lower, quieter, with more attention paid to the space overhead, which she noted and filed and began to incorporate into her own movement within the first hour. He was taking them to a settlement called the Greywater Hold, 2 days' march northeast. Perhaps 300 people. They had devourers on their eastern border and a resident they'd been trying to track for 6 months. One resident, Aerith said when Mara relayed this, directing how many mindless ones. He said between 40 and 60. Fluctuates. Aerith made a sound that was not quite words. I know, Mara said. The coordinate ability of yours works on proximity and on emotional state, neither of which I can guarantee to maintain in a sustained engagement against 40 devourers. Aerith gave her a look. So we do it the other way. We do it every way we have, Mara said, same as usual. They walked in companionable silence for a while. The column moved behind them. Kale was near the front doing a countdown check that Mara had asked him to run every hour, and she could hear him calling numbers in his clear young voice, the same voice she'd first heard stuttering on the parapet 31 days and approximately a lifetime ago. Darrow would have liked this, Aerith said quietly, going out. Finding out what was there. Mara considered this. He would have been terrified. Yes, and he would have liked it anyway. She nodded once. It was true. He had always been like that, afraid of the right things, going toward them anyway, and finding that the going was the point. She had thought in the worst of the 31 days that losing him had taken that quality out of the world entirely, that it only existed in him and was therefore gone. She was starting to think tentatively that she had been wrong about that. She kept walking. The Greywater hold came into sight at mid-afternoon on the second day. Low wooden palisades, smoke from cookfires, the sound of children that hit her somewhere in the chest and kept hitting for a moment before she controlled it. Children meant a settlement that had survived long enough to produce a second generation. Children meant something was working. People appeared on the palisade walls. They stared at the column the way the foreign scout Tom had stared, that recalibrating expression, the adjustment from expecting nothing to looking at 400 armed soldiers, and a queen in her mid-20s who had walked 2 days through open devourer territory without losing anyone. Mara stopped at the palisade gate. An older man appeared above it, heavyset, cautious, wearing the look of someone who had been making life-and-death decisions for long enough that it had become structural in his face. "You're Eastmark," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "We'd heard there was a garrison inside the old ring. We'd assumed everyone was dead." "Not quite," she said. "We've had a complicated month. Can we come in?" He looked at her column. He looked at her. He looked at Tom, who made a small gesture she couldn't read but which seemed to mean something to the older man, something reassuring. The gate opened. Inside, the hold was everything the Eastmark garrison had been 2 weeks ago, wary, tired, functional through sheer stubbornness. They fed her column, which took a significant portion of their stores, and which the hold's people gave without visible hesitation, the way people gave things when they understood that cooperation was the only arithmetic that worked. Mara noted this and liked it. The resonant they'd been tracking had a pattern, the hold's own commander, a woman named Sira, perhaps 40, with calloused hands and a habit of absolute directness that Mara found immediately comfortable, had charted over 6 months. It moved in a circuit. It directed, retreated, rested in a specific location in the eastern ruins, then directed again. The circuit ran about 12 days. "It's been on day 9 when you arrived," Sira said. "Day 11 now." "Then it moves again in 1 day." "Yes." Mara looked at the chart. "Show me the rest location." She and Sira and Rudo spent 3 hours at a table in the hold's main hall, going through the chart, arguing productively about 2 tactical points, and building a plan that Mara would have said was impossible 6 weeks ago and now looked merely very difficult, which was a category she had learned to work in. "The hard part," Rudo said, "is that you can't just use the recognition on a resonant the way you use it on the mindless ones. Resonants remember what they were. They've chosen. The recognition doesn't break them because there's nothing to break them back to. So we do it differently with the resonant," Mara said. "How?" She thought about Rudo himself, about Bryn. About 2 beings who had spent 8 years living alongside humans and had arrived at something that was, if not loyalty, at least a kind of weight they couldn't set down. About what it had meant that, when she gave Rudo her name to use, he'd used it. "We talked to it," she said. The silence from both of them was expressive. "I'm not saying it works," she said. "I'm saying it's a tool we haven't tried. Every other tool costs us soldiers. If the resonant can reason, it can be reasoned with. Maybe not to alliance, but maybe to something less than total war." Rudo was quiet for a long time. "There's one like that," he said finally. One that's been questioning for a long time, a resident commander who never quite, he stopped. I don't know where it is. But they exist. Good, Mara said. Then it's not an impossible category, it's just a hard one. She rolled up the chart. One problem at a time. Tomorrow we address the one on day 12. She was at the door of the hall when Sira stopped her. The people you brought, Sira said. 400 from inside the ring. They've never been outside before. No. How are they holding up? Mara looked back at the hall, where her soldiers and the hold's people were sharing food, and in some cases, beginning to share the more essential currency of people who have survived similar things, the particular shorthand of mutual recognition. Aerith was in conversation with two of the hold's senior fighters. Kale was eating with enormous focus in the way young men ate, when they were pretending not to be exhausted. Better than expected, she said honestly. Worse than I'll admit in front of them. She paused. The same way I'm holding up. Sira nodded slowly. Darrow of the Eastmark, she said. We heard about him, even out here, he was good. Yes, Mara said, he was. She walked out into the hold's courtyard under the open sky, which was turning the dark blue of evening and had more stars in it than the ring's interior had ever shown her. The stars partially visible and partially obscured as they always were, but here with no walls limiting the angle of view. More of them, so many more of them. A whole overhead country she hadn't known existed. She stood in the courtyard and looked up. She thought Darrow never got to see this. Then she thought, I'll see it for both of us. Then she thought, that's not something you can actually do for a dead person. It's a story you tell yourself so the grief has somewhere to go. And then she thought, but stories you tell yourself are still true in their way. The way grief was true. The way the knife on her hip was true, not used, not set down, just carried the weight of it familiar and necessary. Not a wound, not armor, just the truth of something that had happened and couldn't be undone, worn in a place where she could always find it. She breathed the cold outside air. She watched the stars. She let herself feel, for exactly 5 minutes, everything she had been keeping behind the door. Then she closed the door again and went back inside to prepare for tomorrow, because tomorrow had 40 devourers and a resonant commander in it, and the world was waiting, and it was full of people who needed her to still be standing. She was still standing. That, she had decided, was the work. The resonant commander was not where it was supposed to be. This was, in Mara's experience, the standard shape of any plan encountering reality. Things were not where they were supposed to be. People were not what you thought they were. The thing you prepared for turned out to be adjacent to the actual thing, close enough to make your preparation useful and different enough to make you improvise. She had stopped being surprised by this. She had started, instead, building plans with gaps in them, deliberate spaces where she expected to fill in different information when she arrived. The resonant commander was not in the eastern ruins at the location Sira's 6 months of observation had established. What was in the eastern ruins was a fresh devourer kill, a mindless one, put down by something that moved with precision and economy, and a set of marks on the stonework that Rudo looked at for a long, still moment before he said anything. It's a signal, he said, not to us, to other resonants. What does it say? He looked at her. It says there's a human in the outer lands who can speak the old language, the recognition signal. It's been passed. He paused. It says there may be a way out. She absorbed this. Out of what? She said. Out of what they are, Rudo said quietly. The mindless state, the transformation. Some of them, more than you'd think, didn't choose it. Some of them were changed against their will by the same commanders who now direct them. And there's a belief, very old, that the recognition signal could, he stopped, that the right kind of recognition, strong enough, could reverse the transformation. Mara stood very still. Could it? We don't know. It's never been tried. It requires someone capable of the recognition signal, and it requires a being that was transformed against their will, and it requires the resonant commanders to not know it's happening because they would stop it. They need the mindless ones. It's the source of their power. He looked at his hands again, the new habit she'd watched develop over the past 2 weeks. If you could turn them back, even some of them, even a few, it would change the entire balance. The devourers who were people. The people who were devourers. The smiling one with Darrow's smile that was not Darrow, was never Darrow, was some other person's tragedy wearing an expression that had reached her across 40 feet of morning air and unlocked something she hadn't known she was keeping locked. Someone, she said slowly, someone specific, one of the mindless ones that came through the ring. She stopped, considered. The smiling one. Rudo was very still. Was that someone specific? I don't know, he said. But the signal you sent, I've been thinking about it. The strength of it for a first use, unguided, it was unusual. Most people who carry that ability take years to develop that much resonance. You did it in grief, in a fraction of a second without training. He paused. I think you recognize someone. The knife on her hip. The smile that she would have known anywhere. The fever that had taken him, 3 months and 31 days ago, in the settlement's inner ward, in a room she had not been able to make herself return to. The fever that had come from nowhere, spread to no one else, broken no pattern of infection the physicians could identify. She sat down on a broken section of wall. The sky above was the same great pale blue it always was, and the wind was cold, and everything was very quiet for a moment in the way things sometimes went quiet when you were standing at the edge of something that changed everything. The devourers that came through the ring, she said, the specific ones placed by the commander, not the random incursion ones. They came in as a group, at the same time. She stopped. If someone was transformed against their will and then directed into that incursion. Mara, Rudo said. Tell me it isn't possible, she said, not a plea, a question direct and measured. He didn't say it wasn't possible. She sat with that for a while. With the shape of what it meant, and the shape of what it didn't mean, and the long arithmetic of what you did with hope when you had been careful, for a month and more, to not carry any because the weight of it on top of everything else felt unsurvivable. Then she stood up. Then we have a different second priority, she said. After the commander, the smiling one, if it's who I think it may be, I need to find it. She looked at Rudo steadily. Can the transformation be reversed? We think so, the theory is sound. The practice has never been. Can it be reversed by me? A long pause. Possibly, he said, if the connection was strong enough, if the recognition was mutual, if the will on both sides, he stopped again. It would take everything you have. And there's no guarantee. She nodded once. No guarantee, she said. No guarantee is the normal operating condition. She turned and walked back toward where her soldiers were waiting. Aerith. Commander. We're changing the second objective of this operation. I'll explain on the move. She looked at her column, all of them watching her with the patient attention of people who had learned to move when she moved and stop when she stopped and trust the space in between. We're adding a search pattern to the Eastern Circuit, looking for a specific devourer. Distinctive features, about 14 feet, undirected movement pattern, one identifying characteristic that I will explain to the observation scouts. It is to be contained, not killed. Under any circumstances, not killed. She said it clearly. She said it without inflection, because inflection would have cracked the sentence in the middle, and she needed the sentence to stand. Understood, Aerith said. There was no other comment. Her soldiers absorbed the instruction and reconfigured around it the way good soldiers did, without the questions that weren't hers to answer, with the competence that was hers to trust. She walked east. Around her the column moved. The eastern ruins were quiet in the way old places were quiet, full of the sounds of weather and small animals, but empty of human sound, which was its own kind of noise once you knew how to hear it. Structures rose and fell around them as they moved, the remnants of something that had once been a city, perhaps the city, the original settlement from which the ring had grown. Mara looked at it with the newly recalibrated eyes of someone who had recently learned that the world was larger and older and more complicated than she had been told, and she thought about all the people who had lived here, and she kept walking. They found the resident commander in a courtyard at the heart of the ruins. It was not what she had expected, which had stopped being a surprise. It was smaller than the one she had fought on the ring wall, more controlled, more contained, with an expression on its face that she could only describe as tired. It stood in the center of the courtyard and looked at her column without moving when they entered, which told her it had known they were coming and had chosen to wait. "You're the one with the signal," it said. Its voice was accented in a way she couldn't place, the consonants slightly off, the rhythm of the words wrong in a way that felt like translation more than incompetence. "Yes," she said. She had told her soldiers to hold at the courtyard's edge, and she had walked forward alone, which was the thing she kept doing, the habit of going first that she had apparently developed somewhere in the last month and couldn't seem to stop. "We were not informed you existed," it said. "I was not informed I existed either," she said. "We've both had a difficult month." The resident commander looked at her for a long moment with the kind of attention that was not hostile exactly, more like evaluation at a very fundamental level. Then it said something that was possibly the most surprising thing anyone had said to her in a month full of surprises. "The one you're looking for," it said. "The undirected one that recognized you. It's in the northern quarter of this ruin. It's been there for 3 days." Mara stood very still. "Why are you telling me that?" she said. "Because I am," it said, "what Rudo is, the questioning kind." It looked at its own hands, a gesture so exactly like Rudo's that she felt the coincidence of it like a physical thing. "I placed the signal in the ruins." The one that said there was a human with the old recognition. "I placed it because I have been told for a very long time that humans were not worth considering, that they had no capacity for the kind of knowing that matters, that they were food and obstacle and nothing else." Its voice was flat, the same flat she had heard in Rudo's voice when he'd told her what he was. "And then I watched you walk out of the gate with 400 people at your back, after 2 days inside your walls, and I thought, that is a person who has looked at the worst thing and decided what to do next, and I am tired of being on the side that causes worse things." She looked at it for a long time. "This could be a trap," she said. "Yes," it agreed. "It could. You could be directing the 40 mindless ones toward my column right now, while you're keeping me here talking." "Also possible." "Why should I believe you?" The resident commander looked at her with its tired, too old eyes. "You shouldn't," it said. "Not yet. Trust is the kind of thing that gets built slowly or it gets built badly. I'm not asking for trust. I'm telling you where the undirected one is because it has been waiting there for 3 days for something it doesn't have the language to ask for, and the only person who can give it what it needs is you." It paused. "After that, you can decide what to do with me." She thought about the knife on her hip, about Rudo, about the foreign scout Tom and the hold's gate swinging open, about Aerith with her bandaged hand, the choice to trust that a bandaged hand could still do what needed doing. "The 40 mindless ones," she said. "Can you direct them somewhere they can't hurt anyone while we handle this?" "Yes," it said. "Then do that," she said, "and then take me to the northern quarter." She walked back to Aerith. "Hold position," she said. "Keep everyone inside the courtyard, Rudo with me." Aerith looked at her. "Commander." "I'll be back," Mara said. "I'll be back or I'll send word. Either way, you continue the operation and get the hold's people clear of the eastern border." She paused. "Don't wait." Aerith held her gaze for a moment with that stripped-down look, the one that said, I see what we're working with and I'm still here. I'll give you an hour, Aerith said. Fair, Mara said. She walked north with the resonant commander and Rudo, through ruins and silence and the sound of wind moving through places where walls had fallen. And she did not let herself feel anything yet about what she was walking toward, because feeling it would make her hands shake, and she needed her hands steady for what came next. The northern quarter was a collapsed hall, 3 walls standing, the 4th open to the sky. In the middle of it, standing very still in the way the undirected ones sometimes stood when they had nothing to respond to, was the devourer with the smiling face. She saw it and stopped walking. From here she could see details she hadn't been able to see from 40 feet up on the wall. The specific set of the shoulders, the way it held its head slightly to one side, the way its hands, large, wrong proportioned, built for a world she didn't want to think about, hung loosely at its sides in a posture that was not a devourer's posture. Something about the weight distribution, the ease of the standing, the slight forward lean. Rudo was very quiet beside her. "Give me room," she said. He stepped back. The resonant commander stepped back. She stood alone at the edge of the collapsed hall and looked at the figure in the center of it. "I don't know if you're in there," she said. Her voice was steady. She had made it steady. "I don't know if this works. Rudo says it might. He also says it requires the will on both sides, and I don't know what you still have will for, or if you can hear this, or if this is." She stopped, breathed. "I carried your knife," she said. "I couldn't move it. I tried the 3rd day, couldn't do it. It's still where you left it." She paused. "I saw you smile at me up on that wall. I know that was you. I know it the way I knew when you were pretending to be calm. I always knew that. You were terrible at pretending to be calm, and you never believed me when I told you. I know it the way I know my own hands." The devourer turned its head. Very slowly, as if turning was difficult, as if it was moving through something thick and resistant. It looked at her. She opened every door she had been holding closed for 31 days. Not as a tactic, not as a technique, just as an act of honesty. "This is what I have, this is what is real, this is what it cost and what it was worth. This is all of it, everything, take it if you can hear me." The recognition signal went out like a sound pitched below hearing, like a change in atmospheric pressure, like the moment before lightning. The devourer's face, the borrowed face, the wrong face, went through something she had no word for. Not pain, not release, something between. Then the light in the eastern ruins changed, and the resonant commander made a sound, and Rudo made a sound, and the world did the thing where everything that was certain stopped being certain and became something else instead. And Mara stood in the center of it with her husband's knife on her hip and both hands open, and the doors all open behind them. She had known, when she stepped through the gate of the Eastmark Ring, that the world outside was full of problems she didn't yet have enough information on. She was getting the information. Whatever it cost. Whatever came after. She was still standing.